being kind of uploaded to YouTube as part of the playlist?
Yes, all the recordings get uploaded to YouTube. There's playlists for each SIG and for the PSC. It's a manual process, so sometimes it takes me a few days. Maybe SIG release will figure out a way to automate it, but right now it's manual. So, but
Okay.
I try to
So
get.
I don't see the last one, so I was wondering if it was discontinued or something like that.
No, did you look? When did you last look? I think I uploaded it yesterday.
Oh, okay. Probably I need to refresh it then.
Yeah. If
So
it's
it's
something
nine.
missing, let me know. Let me know. I may have.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I was checking it soon after the last meeting. I missed some things. So, anyways, thanks a lot.
Yeah. I think I did it yesterday.
Oh,
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. So this is the Nephio SIG Automation meeting for September 21st. So agenda is shown here. I'll try to keep my comments brief. A few updates. The SIG network architecture met on Monday for those of you who weren't there, and is working on developing the specific set of user stories and use cases that will be part of what we want to, or that's their bid for V1. And I think I said there in that meeting, somebody asked, my mental model for the three SIGs is network architecture is sort of like product management. This SIG is sort of like engineering, and SIG release is sort of like what we call eng prod, or release engineering. It's a combination of build engineering, release engineering, and probably test engineering with CI/CD. So it's a lot of stuff plus administration. So just other people may not agree, but that's that's my mental model. So what that means for this group is dig into those things being proposed. They'll come up with a list, and our job will be to say how we meet that and to give them feedback on whether that's a reasonable list and how we might implement the requirements, which may be different than how they've written them, and what sort of way to break that down into a time frame that we show iterative, reasonable delivery rather than some sort of massive all-in-one drop that takes 3 years. So that's sort of going forward the process. With that said, I want to call for agenda items for the next meeting. I've put one on myself already, which is I want to, in the next 2 weeks, even though those user stories and use cases aren't done, we have a general idea of what we're trying to do here. Try to come up with the next layer. We have sort of very high level architecture diagrams from way back in June or even earlier. And I want to take those and start to break them down into actual components we can execute on delivery of. Obviously, that will be a proposal or even a early shaped to hang our thoughts on, and we'll take it from there. But that would be, I think we need to. We're frankly past due time. We should have some more concrete designs and deliverables getting started. So with that said, Tal, is there anything you want to add, or shall we get started with the rest of the agenda?
I think I'll just add that yes, it's a good idea to start the system component breakdown. I still feel we, again, a word we've been using is rough drafts at this point. I think we're still at the rough draft mode. Architecture is still not closed on the use case, what the components are. So we're kind of pulling it from both ends and trying to move forward. But we're, just for all of us to keep in mind, we're not closing. I don't think we're all very clear over what the components are going to be, but we can have a rough idea of what they are, and we can start working on POCs for them. So that's part of, I just added myself to the agenda next time. I'll share a link in there very soon. And so encouraging everybody to really throw their hat in the ring here and propose components that they think are important. So next meeting will be important, and I hope people really contribute ideas of what these components should be, right? And later on, they might fall by the wayside, right? We might think that certain components, maybe it's not the best use of our effort, but it's a good idea to start identifying what are the gaps, what are the missing pieces that we have. So in my mind, we're still in the gap analysis phase, where we're trying to understand what's actually missing for us to achieve Nephio's goals in Kubernetes. And there are no bad ideas at this point. They're all good ideas. And as a community, if we say certain components are too big for us to chew on, or maybe shouldn't be in scope, well, that's part of the discussion that we want to have.
So, John, so this is maybe a dumb question. So I know we want to plan for the initial release and stuff. At the same time, also, Google had plans to push the first version of the code. So where is the relation? What's the relationship between that and this? Are we calling the first version of the code the first release, or are we saying that is just a bootstrapping code, and then on top of it we are planning the first release, and that's where we are defining the components?
That's a great question. So I think that there's a few different things we're working on. So I think I said back in the summit, right, some of the pieces that we have today, the reason they're not released is that they're architecturally different, because they're almost prototype code built on a different methodology with Cloud Build and internal Google Cloud services. And so we can't really make that part of the open source project. It wouldn't make sense. So Stephen and his team have been working on some things. And then there's pieces that we're upstreaming. I think I saw Morton is on here. Morton said GL at Google for Porch. So we're upstreaming upstreaming from the point of view of Nephio, certain things into the KEP project that I believe we need. And I've shared some of those documents. I can add them to this agenda afterward, or after I stop talking. And so some of those pieces that we're talking about as CodeDrop go into the upstream community. Some of those pieces I think Stephen's working on, but it's not going to be the complete architecture. It's not like we're going to drop a V 0.5 of Nephio that does everything. We're going to drop pieces of it that we can use as a starting point. Seed is, I think, the word we used. It's not a first version. We open source, like at Google, we sort of open sourced this really early in the cycle. Like if you look at Kubernetes was further along at the time it initially open sourced than we are here. And we did that with the awareness that would potentially slow certain things down and make certain things more difficult. But we believe that the act of building a community consensus, particularly around the APIs and CRDs associated with network function configuration and network function management, is going to be hard and long. And so we wanted to initiate that process early, even if sort of platform pieces weren't really quite there yet. So all that is a lot of explanation, but to maybe hopefully directly answer your question, the seed code won't cover everything. The seed code will cover certain components and certain use cases. Some of it will be directly in the Nephio project. Some of it will be in upstream projects. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's more like we have a bootstrapping good place to start with, then we will design the architecture based on the needs. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we had Anne, yeah.
Hi, my question was about architecture, and you sort of answered. I mean, you did answer it. So follow up to that, should we capture what you just said somewhere so that in the future meetings we don't have to revisit this topic, this question again?
Sure.
In my experience in other open source project, if you join the project later, people tend to ask the initial questions again and again.
Yeah,
That's
I
what-
think that's a great idea. Maybe in something I've been thinking about is like there's a bunch of things that I think we need to start. I think we are already in a place where we can start documenting directionally some of the thoughts and ideas, like we've talked about the management cluster versus the workload cluster. And we can talk a little bit, at least our initial rough draft, of what we think belongs in each one and why. And similarly, we get the rough draft of the components, and then we can identify, okay, these are the pieces that will be coming out of the seed code versus, that. So I agree. We have to figure out, we just have to start doing it, I guess. So maybe we can take an action item.
Sure.
If somebody can write it down, because it's hard for me to do that while also seeing the screen. If somebody,
Yeah, I can take notes, and if you point me to a place to post that, I'll do it.
okay, awesome, thank you. Yeah, so then just take an action item for yourself right there in the notes agenda, and then but an action item for me for us to decide together where to put it.
Sure. And follow-up question to that is, and this, I'm still stumbling about open source processes.
Sure.
Do we define, or should we define a process of how we're doing this also, so that, because we're doing system component breakdown, seed codes, and then eventually driving to an architecture and a 0.x release, right?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about this in the SIG release meeting on Monday.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, yeah, I think well, maybe this is my bias. My memory is that what I proposed went through, which is that we do initial designs and discussions in Google Docs, and then we take those and we formalize them into some sort of design proposal repository in GitHub. I can create that design proposal repository, or we can do just a directory in the Nephio repository that's designs, and that way when they're merged, they're no longer proposals. So I think that's probably where we should do that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Vish.
Yeah, I mean, just want to say plus one to what Anne was saying just now. That was good. More new people join. They'll ask us repeat the same questions. And along with that, I was also going to ask Tal that, he was mentioning about the Nephio goals. If there's any link that you guys can actually point to, hey, these are the Nephio goals, like, it could be like an elevator pitch for somebody, hey, what is Nephio's goals? Maybe Tal knows. I don't want to keep pinging Tal every single time, or John. Even adding that would be great too. That way, because for me, like on the architecture meeting, to extend on what Bala was trying to say, I was like asking, what is the code that is coming from Google too, right? In the sense, that is going to be, I thought it was going to be some sort of an MVP that you build on, which means it will be a solution by itself.
Yeah.
But now we have clarified it, saying that it is not. So that's what I was asking Kaushik. Kaushik probably was not able to get to that point. But good to know. It actually, walking away from the summit, maybe again, because the first time we were thinking that, oh yeah, there's going to be code from Google, and then we're going to enhance that. But it seems like it will be dispersed, and it won't be complete. Seems like. So thanks for clarifying that too.
I mean, I think there'll be enough pieces that we can assemble some sort of basic functionality. Like, so yeah. If the action item then for me can be to just like, so somebody here asked me yesterday, like, where should I start? Like looking at Nephio, and I was like, there's like 15 hours of video or 30 hours of video you can watch. Like it was really, it was awkward. So like, I think we need a better onboarding documentation, better explanation of all this, and sort of a roadmap of what's coming when would be super helpful.
Yeah, because what remains in my mind coming out of the Nephio Summit, in one conversation, me and Sendil, I don't think is here, is from Dell, I'm from Red Hat. We asked like, hey, what do you think is Nephio going to do from a RAN perspective? He said, if you have DU, CU, and your RAN, you have the DU is brought up, the CUs are brought up, and they are configured. So that's the problem. That's the solution to a problem statement I'm thinking in my mind, right?
Yeah.
For some of us, it's like, oh yeah, I bring up network subspaces, you configure them. That is like the very high level, 100,000 feet level that I'm trying to
Yeah.
Like if I were to go talk to somebody to say that this is what they're doing, and then I'm looking at, oh, what somebody else is also doing something similar, but what are we doing? And that's where I think you were talking about all that package management. You were talking about how you want to be able to do validation before applying configurations. So there's bits and pieces like that which are value prop. If they can be consolidated and help communicate those things, that'll be great.
Okay, yeah, we should work on that documentation, absolutely, and so appreciate that. Okay, so why don't we get started? So on the rest of the agenda, Sandeep, are you here to give us your talk?
Yeah, hi, John. Yeah, hi, John. Hi, all. Yes. Can you hear me fine?
Yep, we can hear you fine. I'm going to stop presenting so you can take over.
Sure. So let me know once my screen is visible. I think it is now.
We see an infinite recursion.
Okay. So I'm going to go over the demo. So basically what I have done is I've taken the Nephio POC controller that was demonstrated like 4 weeks ago, and use the same controller for orchestrating or for creating the base infrastructure for the workload that will be then orchestrated on these target clusters. So this is the same diagram that I've taken it from John's presentation, and I just extended it to showcase how the infra can also be orchestrated using the same set of controllers and same Nephio management cluster. So the only difference here is that in order to create the infra, so what we are using is again the KPT packages. And now these KPT packages, they consist of Kubernetes objects which are exposed by AWS or Google or Azure. So in this demo, I have taken ACK, the AWS controller for Kubernetes objects, and I am using Crossplane. So on this management cluster, I have Crossplane deployed and using AWS as the provider for Crossplane. But I'm not using the custom resource definition of Crossplane. So they are pretty much standalone managed objects. So what that means is I have an object for cluster, VPC, node group, etc. I'll show you the KPT package. And again, so yeah, I mean, then all we have to do is now instead of one intent, we have to specify 2 intents. And the first intent is going to be about the infra. So it is the same package deployment custom resource that we have to create, which this controller understands. And then it is going to pull the EKS, the KPT package from the source repo, which I specify, and then it is going to, provided that we have specified some mutations to be done, it will do those mutations and push it to the another repo, which we can call as the infra repo here. And then there is config sync, which is deployed in the same management cluster, which is going to sync these configurations. And that should basically result in creating these AWS resources in the target cluster. So that will bring up our infrastructure. But but that is not enough. So the first step is that you bring up the infrastructure. The next step is that you prepare.
Sandeep, if you don't mind.
Is there any? Yeah.
This is Bala. Sorry to interrupt, but just, I mean, there are wide audience here. If you can just say one-liner about what is Porch, what is config sync, just one-liner, and that would level set a lot of the new audience. And then what is
okay?
Just one-liner about KPT, config sync, and Porch.
Yeah, sure. So so this is the continuation of the previous demo. So I will surely go over just one-liners. So KPT is the package manager that is used in the Nephio project, and so KPT has, KPT consists of KRM files, which are your Kubernetes objects. So I have KRM files for which basically describe the AWS resources, and KPT package has a KPT file. And the KPT file basically, in your KPT file, you can define pipelines for mutating your base KRM objects. So that is KPT. Porch basically gives you the management of these packages in the Porch, management of these packages which you store in the repositories. So you can register your repositories with Porch, and Porch basically automatically discovers all those packages. And then you can perform operations like cloning the packages, editing them, pushing them to other repositories. All the management, management of these packages can be handled by Porch. And config sync is to perform the GitOps here. And config sync, basically you have to configure config sync. You have to point it to a target repo, and you have to basically specify the kind of authentication that is required in order to contact the target repo. So in my case, in this case, config sync, which is in the management cluster, is configured to pull the packages and synchronize them from this infra repo. Web UI is the UI for Porch. I'm not using it, but it is there. I mean, you can look at the older videos, and there was a demo on Web UI as well. Controller is the POC controller that John has written, which we are using in this demo. And infra controller, it is not a controller yet. I'm calling it a controller, but this is targeted to do the automations, which I was just talking about. So basically, yeah. Was there any question?
Thanks, Sandeep. That's a great level set. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll continue from where I left. So as I was saying, creation of infra is one step. Then we have to prepare that infrastructure to handle the workload orchestration. And this slide basically explains an example. So the example intent. So this slide basically shows intent, example intents. Let's suppose I want to create infrastructure and I want to have certain nodes in wavelength zone. So I'm talking only about AWS here. And I want to have certain nodes with GPU. So that is the kind of intent that I will be specifying. And this will again be my the package deployment custom resource that the controller understands. And controller is basically, and this should all be present in my KPT package. And if required, the controller should be intelligent enough to perform mutations as per the intent that I specify. It will bring up the infra. That is step one. But after bringing up the infra, it has to, the very basic requirement is that the controller should deploy config sync in the target cluster as well. And that config sync should be pointed to the repo which belongs to that cluster. So in the previous demo, if you remember, every cluster had a repo. Even now, every cluster have a repo. So the curated packages are basically pushed to these repos, and then config sync keeps syncing to these. So that is how the orchestration happens. So as I was saying, after the
I think
we have a couple hands.
Yes.
It's a little. I know it's hard to see the hands when.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at one screen. I was
Exactly. I know that's what happened. That's why I just brought it in. So Ravi, I think you have a hand.
Yes, yeah. So I had a couple of comments when you had shared the initial write-up on the need for config sync in the management cluster. Because what I understand, the config sync is in the southbound, it's interfacing with the API server. So what does that config sync do in the management cluster?
So config sync in the management is syncing the KPT packages, which basically create our infrastructure. And for creating the infrastructure, we are again using CRDs, which are in this specific case, they are from AWS, Amazon AWS controller for Kubernetes. So you can either create. Is there a question? Okay, you can. I'm sorry. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
I was going to chime in, but you finish what you're going to say, and then I'll comment.
Okay, so what I was saying was that you can either create Helm charts out of these KRMs or the KPT packages, but end of the day you are calling Kube API, and these are Kubernetes resources that we are creating, and underneath these controllers will call AWS APIs and create all your infra. But for us, These are Kubernetes resources which we have to create. So that's why
Yeah.
config sync in the management cluster. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, is there an arrow missing between the config sync and your cross-plane ACK controllers?
So
I
if I
just
I think I understand the question here. So if you config sync, so there's different layers to this problem, and the question is, where do you want GitOps? So in one sense, we want GitOps at the edge clusters. That's what the config sync is there for in those edge clusters. However, we may also want GitOps at the higher level intent. And so, well, there's three layers here. One is the edge clusters. One is lower than that, the infrastructure. So what Sandeep was just talking about is he's using config sync here to, he's running in the very early diagrams that you see like at the summit. I have a separate cluster along the bottom called Cloud Management Cluster, and the cross-plane and app controllers would be running there, and config sync would be running there, and possibly the infra controllers would be running there. There's only one of those, maybe, or one per cloud provider. Like what Sandeep has done is put that into the management cluster, which is fine, right? That's just about where it gets run. But just sort of conceptually, functionally, there's a set of intent about the infrastructure layer, and that's the infra repo, and we use GitOps for that as well, which is why we have config sync there as well. We actually can also use GitOps for the management layer. So we could actually drive, instead of kube control apply, some high level intent, we could actually drive it as create a package of that high level intent and drive it through Porch and through config sync as well. But so it's sort of like Inception. It's just like you can keep applying the same methodology and the same tools at every single layer, and it sort of unrolls as it goes. So I don't know. Maybe that hits that.
Yeah, no, I understand. But I was just trying to understand, once the config sync sees, okay, infra repo has the kind of updated packages, whom is it calling? Is it the app controllers? Is that
okay? So config sync, yeah, as I said, so it will be the config sync. So the KPT package has the Kubernetes objects, which the ACK understands, or basically Crossplane understands, and they define your, as I said, cluster, VPC, node group. So KPT, so config sync is basically when it will sync this package, it will create these Kubernetes custom resources, which the ACK controllers will act upon. So there is ACK controller running on the system, so which is looking for these custom resources. So it's the same reconciliation control loop. So whenever there is a new intent or new custom resource, if I say that I want to create a cluster, I create this cluster CR. The ACK controller will act upon it, and it will basically reconcile to this new information, and as a result, it will create the cluster in the EKS.
Sandeep, one question here. I guess a couple of us have a similar question on the combination of cross-plane ACK controllers you're showing here. My understanding is that when deploying cross-plane, it also comes with its own providers for different cloud environments. In this case, maybe the cross-plane provider for AWS that you could use to deploy AWS resources. But not quite clear how you can combine crossplane with ACK controllers.
Okay.
Can you clarify on that?
Yeah. So let me clarify. So I have deployed crossplane with AWS as the provider. So yeah, that is what is done. So through this slide, all I want to say is that I'm running crossplane, and in the backend, it is the AWS controller that it is using, not Google or Azure one. That's what I'm saying.
So not ACK.
Is there a question?
Yeah, when you say AWS providers, you mean crossplane AWS providers, not ACK.
Crossplane AWS provider, but underneath it, I think it uses the same.
Well, the implementation is different. Maybe under the hood, they all use AWS APIs, but ACK controllers is a different implementation from crossplane provider for AWS.
Okay.
But does it matter to us so far at the moment? Because at the end of the day, it's the content, the manifest of the infra repo that will determine which controller picks it up. And so I think for this demo, whether they both are used or not, I think is not as relevant at the moment. Right? I think what I think is important here is the flow and the relationship between the flows. Whether I think whether you use both or not, I think is a detail at this stage.
Yeah.
from
So
my
let
point
me
of view.
just let me just clarify. Not using both. It is crossplane with the AWS provider.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Yeah.
That clarifies it.
Okay.
I just had one more comment, related to what John said before about, there could be initial stages too, right? So yes, we're all thinking declaratively. I just put a comment. I think everybody understands that. As long as we're working declaratively, it doesn't really matter what exactly the resources are and what pulls it off. But just to remind ourselves too that, yeah, John's point is actually important. Sometimes we need to set up, we have pre-requirements for our requirements, right? Because especially when we work in air-gapped environments, you might really be starting with nothing, right? You need to set up your installers first, right? This is something we deal with a lot at Red Hat in our work, and we actually have special tools to create what we call a zero cluster, which has everything it needs to start installing the management clusters, right? So, but yeah, there are certain things that are just not in scope. So we have to start with an assumption that, yes, at least we have an environment where we can access cluster installers and tell it declaratively what clusters we want to install. And I think that is out of scope of Nephio, right?
Hey, Dan, I just want to, not to diverge this POC conversation, but I just wanted to reiterate, right? I'm still not clear. Maybe I missed a few meetings. Right. So Nephio's target, right? How the edge cluster itself will brought up from the bootstrap, right? When you are trying to deploy a RAN workload, I've asked this question already a couple of times, but I haven't gotten a clear answer yet, right? Is it in scope of Nephio to bootstrap the entire cluster from the zero touch kind of thing, bare metal? Or you expect the Nephio should already have some OS and Kubernetes based deployment, right? So Nephio starts from there. What is the goal of Nephio?
So that partly is going to come out of the net architecture group. I'll tell you what my opinion is. My opinion is that I want to rely on existing upstream projects that already do those things. I don't want Nephio to try and build something new to do that. So unless there's, and if we identify a gap that this is needed, then maybe we do. Or maybe we find an existing ecosystem project that does some of this. So I can say from a cloud provider perspective that I believe, I know Google does, and I believe Amazon does, and I don't know about Microsoft, I think they do too, at least the big three of us, have already products in the market where you can drop hardware in some POP somewhere, and it can then be managed via the cloud provider's APIs. And so that to me is an equivalent to what we're doing here. We're doing it with EKS, or with in the past I shared it with GKE. Those aren't edge products, but as long as they can be managed by Kubernetes APIs and those clusters can be created by Kubernetes APIs, we don't actually care. So
the reason
those environments.
The reason for asking that, John, right? When you're trying to deploy the workload itself, it requires changes underneath in the operating system, even though that's the problem. Right, it's a chicken and egg problem kind of thing, right? When you're trying to orchestrate via Nephio, the RAN workload, right? It requires changes in BIOS, it requires changes in the OS settings and all those things, right? So how, if the cloud API already bring up to a certain state, with the workload will not satisfy the underlying requirement, right? You have to think from completely bottom-up approach. So that's what we are looking at, right? Because otherwise, if Nephio doesn't solve that, then it's kind of.
No, I'm sorry. Jump in, trying to save a little time. I agree we need to solve that, but it may not be, maybe with upstream projects and maybe with ecosystem projects. So early on, we talked about this gap analysis, and we definitely need to be able to express the thing that Nephio needs for all of this machinery to work is that those things you're talking about need to be able to be expressed in KRM. So we have to be able to express the requirements that the network function has of the underlying infrastructure. And the infrastructure, KRM, has to be able to express, here are the types of things I satisfy. And then we need a scheduler, effectively, that matches. Now, right now, so I think when Stephen, I don't think Stephen's gonna have time to do his demo today, but this is something we definitely are within scope, is conceptualizing the preparation steps at the OS layer. And we need APIs to do that. So like when I talk about the Google version of it, we are providing APIs in our edge solution to manage the low level settings in the hardware like that, as well, as bringing in Maltus and SRIOV ecosystem projects, not our own. But we'd also have a Fabric API that we would have to deliver for say, configuring VLANs and VRFs in the top of rack switch. So that's something that needs to happen as well. It needs to be expressible via KRM. Those KRM resources need to be able to live in the package. You need to be able to specify this workload needs this particular configuration. So we want to standardize as part of Nephio as much of these things as we can, so that different vendors' workloads can express their requirements in the same way, and different infrastructure vendors' platforms can express the requirements they meet in the same way. So this is absolutely within scope. The question is identifying gaps and how we solve them, whether it's internally or with partnerships with ecosystem projects.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that. Sandeep, sorry about it.
No problem. That was a good question. Yeah, thanks.
So we have one more hand with Anne, and then we should let Sandeep get to his. Yeah. Anne?
I can wait, but let Sandeep finish his presentation.
Okay.
Okay. So this is an example. I mean, the kind of intents that you want to specify. So as I said, the infra intent, you can specify the kind of, in case of AWS kind of regions, GPU, CPU, or the intent, you could always also say the infra that you want to deploy after the cluster comes up, which could be, you can say Maltus, SRIOV, and the controller should basically first create the infra, wait for it to come up, and set up all the required components that are specified in the intent. And then the controller is maintaining these objects, which are called the clusters infra Nephio org objects. So these are already existing. So currently it contains information about the target repo, but it can also contain the information about the properties of the cluster. And eventually when we specify the workload intents, so and we say in the workload intent that I want my application to be deployed in a cluster which is in wavelength zone, for example. Controller will look for all these objects, the cluster infra objects, and it will find the suitable cluster this way, and basically push the KPT package to the corresponding repo. So this is one way of specifying the first, basically enabling the infrastructure to handle workload, and then specifying the intents and handling the placement intents according to the hardware properties that the workloads want. So this slide explains the demo. So it's a simple demo. So first step is to basically specify the infra intent. It is a simple intent, and all it is saying is that the source repo and the target repo where my EKS package is present. And the intent is specified as the deployment package. And the controller, the Nephio controller is basically going to pull this package, perform mutations, and push it to the target repo, which is infra deployment repo in this case. Config sync, which is in the controller node, will basically sync this package, and it will call it. It will create the. It will basically apply the AWS related objects. And that at that point, the EKS cluster will basically start to come up. And then we need another control loop, which basically has to watch this resource. And when this resource comes to a ready state, it has to, in this specific case, I prepared the kubeconfig file for it once it came to a ready state. And after preparing the kubeconfig file, deployed config sync to the target cluster, and configured config sync to point to the repo, which is the target repo, basically, which is related to my the cluster that I am bringing in, and that's about it. So that at that point the cluster is ready to handle workload. And then there is no change. It is the same intent that is demonstrated already. The workload intent is specified, and the workload intent basically says region 1 or some that property. And the controller will select the edge repo as the target repo this time, and it will push the package to this edge repo. And our config sync in the EKS cluster is already watching, watching for the latest resources in this edge repo, and it will sync the workload in this case. And end result is that user just specifying 2 intents will result in infra orchestration and the workload orchestration. So any questions on this slide?
Yes.
If I may
Sandeep,
jump in,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I had
Go
my
ahead.
hand raised. If you can go back a slide or two, one slide. Yeah, this one. No, the other one. Sorry, this one. So, a little background. I work for Marvell, so DPUs are near and dear to my heart by profession. The workload intent. When you're deploying a workload, sometimes that workload, let's say a network function, a virtual function, can require specialized drivers or libraries to be installed and possibly rebooting the node, the DPU or GPU, right?
Yeah.
That's a fact of life. That's not controversial. So how do you see that requirement being met here? The fact that you're not fetching a full, you're not just fetching the workload image and deploying it, but you may have to go back one step and reprocess the infrastructure, so to speak, before you can deploy it.
So reprocess so what I have thought about is that, I mean, when I'm creating, I know about EKS. So when you are creating the EKS, you can specify that you want certain nodes with GPU, and it will bring up those. But then you have to query the node to know like which node has GPU, and also so based on that query, that is what is required to handle the placement intent for workloads. So then we have to see which CNFs require GPUs. You have to query the nodes, and you have to have this information handy in order to resolve that intent. But what I am saying is that when you create that infra, you get all that information and populate this object, which is called the cluster infra object. The information is there in the controller node itself. So that is one way. At that point, we have to read the requirement of all the network functions and parse through these objects and find a suitable cluster.
Sorry,
just poke in here because we are running low on time. I want to make sure that Sandeep has a chance to actually show his demo. We have another several other hands. So maybe I think I know where you're coming from, and I think that the answer is sort of we don't know yet, but that's something we can fit in as a requirement. Let's let Sandeep finish because there's only 15 minutes left, and then we have like 4 hands up.
Okay. Not a problem. I just want to say that the point I was driving at is sometimes you don't have an EKS or a GCP, or you don't have a public cloud. You have to build that. Anyway, we can take it offline.
Yeah.
Okay. So please continue, Sandeep. We'll handle the hands after folks because I'm afraid he's going to run out of time.
Okay, so that was about the demo, and based on maybe these user stories we can take offline. So this is the controller node. So first I will start the controller. So first I'm going to apply the infra intent. So infra intent, as I said, is this is all that it has. The only new field is this package type infra, which the controller has to. It is enhanced slightly to know. If it is infra, then it does not go and look for the clusters, for example. So let's just apply it.
Can we see? Oh yeah, after you apply it, maybe we can take a look and see what that intent looks like.
Yeah. Okay.
What that package looks like. I mean,
Is it readable?
that's readable. What I was asking is what's in the actual package, the Nephio.
Oh, what's in the actual package?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So this is the actual package. So as I said, there's a KPT file. And so I have VPCs. I mean, these are the KRMs which define my VPC. Then I have roles, all the KRMs for roles. And then the cluster.yaml itself. Yeah, basic properties about the cluster, the region, and the roles that it should point to.
Okay.
This
so
is
that's gonna, okay.
Yeah. So this is my package. So yeah, when I applied this intent, right? So Poach basically it already has taken the package and pushed it to this infra deployment repo, and it is in proposed state. So let's approve it. Okay, so this should basically have triggered the cluster creation.
So that causes it to get merged to the main branch of the repo, which means they can pick it up and apply it to the infra repo.
Yes, and we see that the cluster is already, it has started to come up in the creating state. So it will take its own time. It takes 12-15 minutes to come up. But yeah, so that is what happened. I applied the intent. The controller pulled the package from my the Nephio test deploy repo, and then it basically pushed the package to the infra deployment, and it basically kept it in the proposed state. So we manually approved it. And once we approve it, the config sync on this cluster is already pointing to infra deployment repo. So it will basically sync the package. So that basically resulted in creation of this, which is coming up. So now on this system, there is a script which is running as a cron job. So that is continuously watching the objects, these objects which are getting created. So whenever it will come to the active state, so that script will basically deploy config sync on this, and it will also change the okay.
And maybe my question was regarding that. How did you do it? So sorry to interrupt, but so eventually this could be done through a controller or some other means that actually does it automatically and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, this is the controller. The controller. The controller which is running in the lower window. This is the controller, and top window I specified the intent. So
I think though the script you have could be a controller, right? It doesn't need, like, I think just for ease of talk, you did a script, but you could have a controller that's watching that.
yeah. So yes. It actually it has to be a controller. So at present I'm just basically specifying what it needs to create the. So it is a proposal actually, and the next task is to create a controller which will do all this. So that is what I had specified in the stories on the last slide, to create such controller. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. So yeah. So now it is happening in the backend, and that loop is running. So I can just specify the workload intent also in the meanwhile. So it is the. So this is the same intent that we saw last time. So it will deploy the caching DNS application.
That's what it's going to do after the cluster is ready?
Yeah, so it will wait for the cluster to become ready. Oh, sorry. So it is, it has pushed another package to, now it is to the edge repo cluster, which will belong to the cluster which is under instantiation state at present. So it is also proposed. Let's just publish this as well.
And then publishing can happen automatically with anything can be done with a controller, right?
Yeah.
How much human
Yes.
intervention you want and oversight you want. That's the idea.
Exactly. Okay, so it is approved. So now it is all set. So now whenever our cluster comes to ready state and the required infrastructure is deployed, it will automatically, the config sync which will get deployed on this cluster will automatically sync this package and the workload will get deployed. So since it takes time, I had actually recorded another session. So yeah, same thing. So I mean, nothing special here. So it is just that in the end, I went to the AWS console. Yeah, and I mean, I could see the caching DNS deployed there. So now it will happen like whenever it comes to ready state. So it is still in creating state. So all I did is specify two intents, and so what I propose is basically, so there is a script which has these steps. So this is a script which is running in loop. So it is doing multiple steps, creating kube config, basically from a secret. It keeps looking for this resource. And whenever it comes to ready state, at some point it is deploying the config sync in the target cluster. And it is also changing the infra, the cluster infra object. So basically it starts with not ready. And when the cluster is ready, it will just change it to ready and do a new push to the config sync, which will also get reconciled. So as a result, on our management node, the infra object, which is related to this cluster, will show that it is in ready state. So it is just an idea. I mean, similarly, it can also show the properties of the cluster. I mean, once we bring up, like I was giving the example of, actually SRIOV is not supported on GKE. So EK, sorry. So if I am bringing on bare metal, for example, and I have SRIOV multus, so all those, I mean, I can populate the infra object with the cluster infra Nephio object with these properties, which will be later consumed by the Nephio controller for resolving the placement intents.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is the workflow, and we have 3 hands, so that's why I'm kind of jumping in. This is the workflow where we have a set of infra out there, and then the workload gets scheduled onto it. There's another thing I think I saw going in the chat that you can also create infra based upon the workload demands. So both those workflows should be supported in Nephio ultimately. Fish?
Yeah. So, I mean, looking for a confirmation because later parts you talked about SRIOV and stuff. So I'm thinking that this is actually on nodes that are virtual, like VMs, rather than bare metal nodes, right? Both the control plane and the worker nodes.
What do you mean?
I mean the cluster that has been created is actually running on they're actually VM nodes rather than bare metal control plane and worker nodes.
They can
Correct?
be. Yeah, they can
They
be.
can be.
Yes.
Okay, but in your demo, was it
My
all bare
demo
metal?
is my demo is EKS.
Okay, is EKS only? I don't know. EKS, do they support bare metals or they don't?
EKS is the Kubernetes offering from AWS. So
Yeah, it's a cluster. It's not a
cluster,
node.
it's a,
Yeah.
not a node. Yeah.
No. What I'm asking is, are those nodes bare metal nodes or are they actually?
It's VMs. It's
They are
VMs.
yeah EC2 instances. I mean, when you create the node group, that consists of EC2 instances. Yeah.
So they're basically virtual machine nodes and not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The platform will be able to do anything as long as it's managed by KRM. But you need a KRM API to instantiate it. If you don't have that, one has to be built. I mean, that's a fundamental building block.
Yeah, I know at some point of time we need to look at the bare metal project in Kubernetes to see what can be used. I know that's probably what, John, you were probably trying to say. We want to be able to use what is out there in the community. Like there's a bare metal operator out there that can be used.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll finish quickly. So yeah, I mean, that's all I had. And with that, I have these, I mean, I can think of these immediate tasks, but we can always review and, I mean, yeah. So first is that we have to, yeah, please.
I'm just saying, let's cover that in Slack. We still have 2 more hands. We have 30 seconds. So I don't know, Ravi and Bala, if you can.
Yeah, sure. I'll do quickly. So in that slide 3, you have an arrow going between the 2 controllers. I mean, is that to kind of notify the kind of the workload controller that, hey, the cluster is ready, so you could start syncing up the workloads that are in the approved state? Is that the reason?
That could be, yes. That is, I mean, the infra controller is updating these cluster objects, and the workload controller could be watching these, and whenever it comes to a certain state, it will consume it.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have this thing documented? I mean, just like John somewhere, so that we can give it a shot or something.
It is all documented. I'll share the document. And
no, I mean, say the scripts and all that stuff. You put it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't have permission, so that is, I'll take it up on Slack. I tried to create a private branch and push the code of controller and the scripts and readmes, everything, the whole recipe of this demo. I'll do that. I don't have the permission yet.
A fork and a PR is the way you do that.
Oh, sure, that will be good. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Sandeep.
Yeah, I'll share the whole thing.
We're over time, but Bala, if it's quick, we can cover it.
Yeah, thanks, John. Hey, Sandeep, great demo. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So one thing it's a general observation, maybe mainly for the next meeting. Here you're talking about the cluster discovery process and the advertisement of capabilities of a cluster. That's an important thing that we need to discuss. What is going to advertise and how the work is going to be assigned, things like that. So that's an important thing that we need to discuss. I prefer event-based rather than anything poll-based or something, but we can discuss that in the next meeting. But that's an important component out of your demo that we need to architecturally we may need to define.
Definitely, we have to discuss that. Today, I mean, I just wanted to bring it on the table that these are the things.
Yes, it brings
like few of the things which need to be automated. But yeah, I mean, this is a starting point. We can discuss further.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Sandeep. That was great. And thank you everybody for coming. We are over time, so have a great week. We'll follow up on Slack.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.